Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cloud Show for another episode with another amazing star on deck to talk to us today. We are going to talk about a problem. The problem, which is when you have a lot of developers and a lot of development computers that they are working on, and then you have environments where you deploy your things, how do you keep everything in sync in terms of frameworks and versions and things like that? That can be a major challenge. It can take a lot of time and energy from any organization. And let's talk today on the Cloud Show about this problem with our star of the show, Isaac Levin. Well, hello there, Isaac.
Hello there, Magnus. How are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you? Are you good?
Yeah, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Looking forward to chatting about how we solve a problem that almost any large company has.
Exactly right. That's what we're all about here on the Cloud Show, to talk about problems that we need to address when we're doing, well, cloud projects or any other project for that matter. In this case, right? And we just need to know, how do you fix these issues? And like I was said in the intro, right? One big issue is that we have a lot of environments and stuff that are out of sync in terms of framework versions and stuff. We're going to talk about that in a second. First, I want to know, who are you?
Yeah, so my name is Isaac Levin. I guess you could say, I'm somebody who just frequently roams places talking about things that I find interesting about tech. So these days I'm in product marketing, technical product marketing, help out with all sorts of fun stuff in that space. And yeah, I've been a developer my entire professional career, even though I'm in marketing now, which is interesting. And I think from that standpoint, my passion has always been around making developers' lives a bit better, right?
Yeah.
And especially, there's so many developer tools out there. There's so many things that folks need to be aware of. Like, what can we do to make that process of knowing what tools to use, what versions of what tools to use? How can we make that simpler? And I've been focusing a lot on this idea of, developer productivity services, right? So, and we'll talk a little bit about how we can, enable some of these tools to really empower developer teams, IT pros, platform engineers, whatever you want to call them, to kind of ship products, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just the simplest possible things, like, for example, all of a sudden something shows up in the portal, because this is from reality. I saw this the other day. It shows up to say, when I'm deploying my Azure function to the cloud, it says I'm deploying a PowerShell one, and it says, oh, this version of PowerShell is going to be deprecated soon. You have to roll that to a different version, whatnot. That's just a simple example to talk about the issue that things keep moving forward, versions and frameworks and things, and then you may have a lot of machines that need to be in sync and have the same version of things when you build and deploy applications, right?
Yeah, I think it's even a bit more complicated than that too. Like, let's say you have maybe you ship like 20 different products across your organization, right? It's pretty certain that all of those products don't use the same tools or even the same versions of those tools, right? So how do you standardize, not just like organizationally, but even down to the team level, right? Like, here's like a really good example. Like, maybe we have a data science team that's building like really cutting edge, like AI sort of tools or AI sort of products. They need some version of Python. But then there's other teams out there that are shipping web apps that are maybe using Node or .NET or what have you. And, do we really want like standardized tools across all of those sort of teams? To an extent, yes. But also we need like another level down where each of those teams have some autonomy to basically cater their own developer experience. So, we're probably going to talk about one of the products that can be used to solve that problem.
Sure, absolutely. Let's do that. Let's dive into the products, because I want to know specifically about this first thing. Who would use this, and what's the scenario where this is like the golden spot for it? And the one that I'm thinking of initially is DevBox. What is a DevBox?
Yeah, so think of a DevBox like this, right? So developers in general, for the most part, I've always used like this, my development machine is a VM, right? So like, 10, 15, 20 years ago, like you'd have a computer under your desk, or maybe you might be in a data center somewhere and you would RDP your remote into it and it would have all of your tools. because like you couldn't have email and Teams and all these things open the same machine that you had Visual Studio or VS Code or whatever running, right? So, think of DevBox as kind of the cloud powered version of that, right? So, at a holistic level, it allows you to basically have a piece of development compute in the cloud that you remote into via the browser or via an RDP session, and it gives you a lot of extra features from an organizational standpoint as well as a customization standpoint to make sure that it's exactly what you want.
Yeah, and that's a brilliant way of putting it, of course. And what I like about that is that that VM likeness that we used to have those VMs to run to ensure that an environment was as it should be. There's nothing else in that environment. There's no email. There's no anything else. There's only the dev tools you need to do and build and do the work that you need. So you remote into that and use it. Now a DevBox is the same, except running in the cloud now as a service.
Yeah, and it's been optimized for some developer things, right? Like it taps into some of the latest developer experience stuff that's coming out of Windows. Visual Studio has some configurations built into it to run a bit more efficient on DevBox as well. You can do those things on Windows as well, but it comes pre-baked for you. You don't have to like figure those things out. You don't have to fine tune all those Windows system settings. Also one thing that's really important is that if you work at a large organization, more than likely, you just can't install typically like any piece of software you want on your machine, right? There needs to be some standardization or some governance, about, what sort of tools, right? Yeah, governance. There's an IT organization, system administrators that kind of own that rule book, right?
Absolutely.
So you want to be able to fit into that rule book still. But you're a developer and you still need the tools that you need to be successful. So it allows this kind of combination and collaboration to be able to really get to where folks want to be. And that's just, building products the most efficient and the best way possible.
Absolutely right. And so let's talk a little bit about maintaining these at scale, which is a cool feature of it. But I wanted to get back to the question I tried to ask before we even told the product name. So who uses, it sounds expensive, like it could be, I guess, but depends. It depends on how much time you're saving in the other end, I suppose. But is it expensive, and who would use this? Only an enterprise or a small organization as well?
Yeah, I think, and I've been asked this question a few times, specifically at DevBox, like who actually uses it, right? And my response has always been any organization that cares about a handful of things, developer experience, governance, and security, right? So because you're entrusting a service to, let's be real, like Microsoft, it has lots and lots of developers, right? Internally. And those development teams, most of them use DevBox internally. So like if you're building Office or Bing or whatever, right? Like more than likely you're working inside of a DevBox. So like there's that case study of like, well, if they're doing it, it means that it's secure, it's governed, and what have you, right? So if you're in an organization that wants to leverage those same experiences, regardless of your size, I think honestly, like the larger a team gets, the more it makes sense. But we've had conversations with startups and small, medium businesses that see the value in it as well. You talk about pricing. I can just talk about pricing, right? Like it's a VM, right, in the cloud, if you really want to call it. So there's compute, there's networking, and there's storage, right?
You run the VM, you pay for the VM while you're working, and then you shut it down when you stop working.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to call out is that like there's some cool features of DevBox like hibernation, right? You can also set it to, if it's hasn't been used in 30 minutes to shut it down. So there are some cost saving areas there. But, at the end of the day, like, if you're going to use it a lot, like there is a price to it. I don't have the price table handy, but
technically also you don't need to invest in that hardware. You can actually have hardware that you need for in your DevBox, and the client PC that you're using. I have a loaner here. The thing that you use to connect, you can have technically a smaller or cheaper machine that can run Office and whatnot, right? But it doesn't have to. It needs to have a remote access. That's it.
Yeah, and you can open a DevBox from the browser, right? So like I've seen people open up a DevBox on an iPad or a tablet, right? So
They
like
can.
yeah, I mean, it's because you can. And because of the fact that it's all of the computing is in the cloud, like you mentioned, you can run this on a very, very low performance device, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is part of the value, right?
Mhm.
Like, when you think about,
Definitely.
not to date ourselves, but like there was a point in time where thin clients were definitely a thing,
Yeah.
where nothing, like you would literally just have a browser, and in that browser you'd have your email, you'd have your thing, you'd have whatever, and then you would do all of your work or in a glorified browser.
Yeah.
I see it as an akin to that in a lot of senses, except the fact that like the experience is much better because it's a full version of Windows.
Oh, absolutely. And then let's talk about a really nice feature, sort of the kicker there. You have your dev boxes, and all of a sudden there's a new revision or a new version of some framework that you need to use. So how do you what do you do to roll that out in your dev boxes then?
Yeah, let's just talk about like how the different ways you can configure dev boxes. I think that's valuable, right? So at the top level, at the bottom level, there's an image, right, where you define, or you can use one from like the Azure gallery. This is a Windows image where, I want this, I want this, I want that on there. But the downside to images is that unless you update those images consistently, like all the tools on them become out of date very, very quickly. So when you create a dev box, like you'll be gifted with a lot of, oh, this is out of date, you need to update. And that's when this next layer comes in, called customizations for DevBox. So, you can do it at the team level. I believe that's in private preview today, which allows like across an organization, like, install these particular tools. Like maybe I want a particular version of Node, or I want Visual Studio Enterprise, or maybe I even want Visual Studio Pro in some cases based on my.
There's a Visual Studio patch that you need to add. I mean, that happens.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
And then there's this, and then on top of the team customizations, there's user level customizations where I want dark mode in Windows.
Right.
I want to use Microsoft Dev Drive by default, right? Maybe my entire organization hasn't decided on that, but I want to use it. Maybe I want certain Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code extensions, right? So, you have that 3 layers of different customization. So like to your point earlier, like when tools get out of date, like the team customizations can come in and save you. And then when you have like that extra bespoke experience that a developer might want to feel more productive, they have that at the user level as well.
So you get both the customization, which can be personal, but you also get the ability to push out updates to everyone, more centralized, so that you don't have to like go around telling people, hey, John, by the way, you need to update Visual Studio or whatnot, right? That's a losing game, if you will, right?
Yeah, and like you can think of these, dev boxes, because I think when we think about the VM, like that VM lives forever, right? And I think what's interesting about dev boxes is that these things can be pretty ephemeral, right? Where maybe you have a task, you spin up a dev box for a particular task. Maybe it takes an hour, maybe it takes a day, maybe it takes a week. But then like once you're done, like you can throw away that dev box, right? You have the customizations that can get you back to that state. So it just gives you the ability to not have to always worry about like, oh, is this VM up to date? Is this thing, do I need Windows patching or whatever, right? Like you literally delete and recreate, and it's the same experience.
Put them back up again. So another thing that actually just came to mind, this is a conversation from a customer scenario of mine recently, that developers want to have access to administer their whole own machine and install and do whatever they want on those. But typically in the organization, that's a no-no. You don't get the privilege of being able to do that. So with a dev box, what I understand can be cool about that then is that you can put your dev boxes in its own network. So that they are walled off from everything else, but they still maybe are able to reach the network on certain circumstances, but they're not like all of those client machines that are in the organization.
Yeah, you can configure them in all sorts of ways. You can have them run in certain regions of the world. DevBox is an Intune managed device, right? So like, it has all of the security requirements that are required if you put Intune on any machine inside your network. And then you obviously, like you talked about, like connecting to things, like you can connect it to your Entra ID, you can connect it to your on-prem Exchange environment as well, right? So, but you can kind of control access. So you do have that ability to, again, we're talking about like governing like the ability of what these developer environments do. Like, yeah, as a developer, like I want local admin like every single time. But like, do I need local admin? And if I do need local admin, do I need local admin and access to literally everything outside my network?
And then the problem is that local admin only gets you so far when you work on multiple projects that have conflicting technical requirements. That's still going to be a problem to install on your local machine. You can still only have one version, or there can still be a risk of collisions. Better to have one environment in one type of dev box and another environment in a different one.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's brilliant. I like that a lot. So what will we then, I mean, to get started using DevBox, is that hard?
I think that there is a little bit of entry to DevBox, just because you need to think about, you know, the structure of how you want to align your organization for this sort of experience, right? So like, I highly recommend taking a look at the DevBox documentation to kind of get understanding of some of the concepts that are there. But, you know, if I wanted to, for instance, create a dev box, like let's just say I was a tenant admin and I was able to, you know, create this sort of thing, you know, within an hour, I can have access to a dev box, right? And that's like not having any of the underlying requirements or anything. Like I can create the underlying primitives in the Azure portal to be able to do those things, and then I can give myself access or give other users access to the ability to create dev boxes. And then I go to the dev portal, which is a specific website that exists to manage your dev boxes as well as your Azure deployment environments. And from there, I can just create. I can add customizations right there as well. And once the environment is provisioned, I'm able to remote into it either in the browser or via IDP, and we're good to go.
That's really cool. And I sort of, when I mentioned network before, I talked about using a private network. Can you put your dev boxes inside of a private network as well?
Yeah. So at the dev box level, and this is getting super into the weeds, so I apologize, but like, so dev boxes are more or less combinations of two things. A definition, which is basically like, how do you define the VM? Like how much CPU cores does it have? How much storage does it have? What image is it using? Right. So it's that. And then the other side is what's called a network connection, which very much is what, to your point, where it's like, I specify the VNet, I specify the firewall configuration, I specify how it's connected, what region it's in. And it's a combination of those two things to make a dev box. And that concept, when you merge those two concepts together, it's called a pool, more or less. And then from there, you create dev boxes on top of dev box pools. So yeah, like you have a private VNet able to do express route and all those things. Yes, the answer is you can do those things.
So technically, there's one more super technical question now.
Sure.
If we have dev boxes defined and we're going to start using them, what if can I use different tags on these for different teams so that we can manage the cost per team?
Yeah, so we didn't even really talk about like that whole level where it's like you have an organization and maybe you have like 7 different teams. You can do that a few ways. You can have different, so the concepts in the Azure portal called dev centers, which basically you can think of a dev center as a overarching like organizational thing. So you can have it at that level, or you can even go a level down at the project level, right? Like maybe you have a development team that they manage like 6 or 7 different projects, right? So you can do it at that level. So yeah, it very much, you can, you know, add your Azure advisor, your Azure budget at the dev center level. And that will give you the ability to, you know, manage costs and all those things, right?
Because that's also important, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing is it's like, it's just, if you did this yourself, for instance, right? Like you had VMs and maybe you had them in like a cold location, right? Where it's like you remoted into some other data center, like being able to aggregate all those costs to figure out like, okay, what teams are spending the most money, like having to do all that work yourself, like why would you do that? Like you don't have to, right?
Not possible. You don't have to do that. You can tag things and have it show up in the bill who is responsible for which DevBox consumption, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant. All right. I loved going like geeky and deep into this and explaining what the value of DevBox is. It's absolutely been a lovely conversation with you, Isaac. But we are out of time. It's terrible, I know. We're going to have to meet again and talk about more technical tools for developers at scale. But I want to thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you. And whenever you want to talk, you know where to find me.
Absolutely right. So thanks, audience, and we'll see you next time on The Cloud Show.